Okay, we'll make a start then. Just to sort of forewarn you, the cameras are on and the sound's on as well, so some of the conversations and so on will be picked up and probably watched elsewhere. People checking on you at home to see you here or whatever. Okay, we just start by introducing ourselves. My name's Terry Price. I work with the Communities 2.0 project. I was Wales Director of the Scarman Trust, but I've been involved also in the Communities at 1 project prior to Communities 2, so I've worked in this sort of field for quite a long time, really. Hayley, do you want to say who you are?
I'm Hayley McNamara. I'm Regeneration Officer at Community Housing Cymru, which is the membership body for housing associations. Part of my role covers digital inclusion. So we've got digital inclusion network set up for digital inclusion officers working in the housing sector. And we've also been looking at affordable broadband for tenants for the last year and a half or so.
Okay, if I just take you through, because you're going to do some of the work to start. Some of you, unfortunately, have been through this process in the workshop we did yesterday. And sort of at least sort of some of the thinking is not that dissimilar. But we're going to start off just by looking at some of the issues and challenges around for tenants, for social landlords, and also with broadband providers, some of the external pressures as well that are out there. We're going to look at some of the examples of attempts that have been made through the UK and so on to address these problems, and then take you through some of the work we've been doing with Community Housing Cymru and RSLs locally within Wales. And possibly we'll have time to have a discussion about some of the issues going forward. What I found really yesterday when we did a similar workshop was to actually just go around the room quickly and find out who's who in here, so we can just gauge the sort of interest, but also your background knowledge of the subject as well. And that gives us a better idea how to pitch the discussions as well. So I'm just going to go around and start with you guys. Sort of.
E-government officer for Carmarthenshire County Council, so obviously broadband for social tenants is quite high up.
Yeah.
Some market involvement as well.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah.
Steve Jenkins, I'm the Digital Inclusion Officer for Swansea Council.
Dan Jolly from Digital Accessibility Centre. Websites.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Steve?
Steve Dixon, Digital Business Officer.
Andrew Jacobs, Digital Inclusion Unit, Welsh Government.
Tracy Williams, Head of IS for United Welsh.
Dylan Griffiths, and I work in economic development at Breakout Council.
David Williams, Packers, affordable broadband and connectivity.
You have to declare an interest in this, don't you? I'll have to send you to the toilet when we have the discussions.
No
Yeah.
problem.
Yeah.
Andy Phillips, Cluster Manager, Southwest Cluster, Communities First.
Sorry, go on, do it again. It's all right, it'll all crash, it's all live. You all right? Sorry. Right. So, right, okay. So a fair selection here, but I think most people have at least got some links into the topic. So we'll do that. What we're going to start off with is to give you some work to do, just to see what you do know and what some of your thoughts are, so we can pinch them as we go along. But on each table, you've got a sheet of flip chart paper. There's a topic for each table, and then I put some prompts out. So you'll have one of these little sheets which gives you the topic, and then there are some prompt questions then behind it, just to sort of help you with the discussion if you struggle really. Just going to give you sort of 15 or so minutes just to address it. You've all got different topics on each table. One's looking at tenants, one is looking at the RSLs, the social landlords, and the other's looking from the position of broadband suppliers. So I'd just like you to sort of take the topic, look at the various prompts there, and just have a discussion and see what your thoughts are, if you can answer some of those questions. And then we'll get some feedback from each of you, and we'll see whether you were thinking actually sort of tallies with the thinking that we've had. Okay? Okay. Done? Okay. We're going to start with a group over here with the with a group that's been looking at things from the position of tenants. So hopefully the mic will work.
Hello.
Yeah.
Can people hear you with that if you stand up?
Stand up, excellent.
Probably easier, people can see you as well then.
Right. So can everyone hear me? Yeah,
Is that
brilliant.
okay? Sound okay?
So some of the stuff we've wrote down then. So not enough disposable income or cost to them. So they don't feel it's a priority to have the internet. Bad speeds. So I think someone mentioned over here that in rural areas, some people are still on dial-up, which is quite frightening. Don't see the benefit of the internet, and therefore socially included. Some people have poor credit rating or no bank account, so that's a major step in itself. Lack of knowledge, confidence. I think, therefore, they don't know what they're missing out on. No computer, and then for some of the benefits, we said it assists with financial inclusion. So, for instance, the use of comparison websites. And therefore you get better deals and services. Reduce costs, so for people that's phone in abroad and things like that, the use of email and Skype can be used. For barriers, we said affordable broadband, kit and knowledge. I think we've mentioned that earlier. And for overcoming them barriers, we said access to free training, perhaps dongles, loaner laptop schemes, recycled computers, and support from credit unions and things.
Okay.
Thanks.
That's fab. Thanks.
I mean, we spent a little bit of time putting some thoughts down as well, so a lot of them sort of concur, but the basic things that we were looking at, certainly from a tenant's perspective, the usual thing, what use is it to me? Are they motivated to sort of go that, is it Sky TV, is it broadband, whatever they're looking at. For a lot of people, it's lack of landlines. The number of tenants now with mobile phones, and of course, landlines cost money. A lot of people don't know how to use the internet. There's a skills issue. There's the sheer cost issue. I mean, if you want to put a broadband package in general, you pay for a very expensive landline, then you get a little bit of broadband on the end. And you notice a lot of broadband suppliers have been dropping the broadband costs, but they put the line rental costs up to just mirror that, so they keep the profits there. You don't have any pay-as-you-go schemes, or very few of them actually. They're usually monthly rentals and so on, which a lot of people can't sort of maintain or sustain. There are issues about equipment, the cost, the choice. Then if you're looking at some of the consequences to tenants if they're not online, the biggest for a heck of a lot of them is going to be the fact that they may struggle to claim their benefits. They default on benefits, they're in debt, they may lose their tenancy as well. You've got all those sort of issues coming along. And the other side, of course, is that a potential sort of pluses from that. People could save large amounts of money as well by being on the internet. There are these little e-cards and so on you can get with the credit union and things like that. You can get discounts and so on your spending. So there are lots of things you can do that actually assist in that. Okay, so that's just some of the thoughts. There are lots of other things, but just sort of probably, I think for us, they sort of covered the main areas. Does that sort of tally with, yeah? I presume it might sort of, a lot of the other discussions are going off message over here anyway, so you're covering the same sort of ground, I think, wouldn't you? Huh? Yeah, I know. Okay. So yeah, tenants' perspective, lots of real sort of big issues and challenges still out there to sort of tackle really if we're going to move things on. What about the group here? Because you were looking at things from the sort of social landlord's perspective. It's going to be a shorter presentation, is it? Yeah.
We did slightly go off kilter. Mimicking some of that as well, it's receiving benefit payments for rent. Which obviously then leads on to sustainable tenancy. Ease of communication out to the tenants, what's going on, how they can communicate to them, and what tools are available as well then. So that if there's apps available, communicating to those tenants that is available rather than just them trying to find out. So, and then the rest of it we did really go off page. So yeah, we haven't answered the bottom,
need a full
the
page,
bottom 8
half
questions,
pages,
and there's only 9. So yeah, we do apologise for that.
Okay, we covered some of the things we were looking for. Yeah, I mean, for RSLs, I mean, it's interesting, even after all these years, you still, with some RSLs, you're still wondering, are they really committed to the idea? You know, lots of people will say, yeah, that's a great idea, tenants ought to have broadband, all the rest. If you go and ask them for a few £1,000 to set up a scheme, they sort of look elsewhere. So, and I won't embarrass Andrew in this. I'll sort of leave you to it. But a lot of them still really haven't, I think, sort of, you know, you have digital inclusion officers. It's a patchy sort of response. You get the public lips, you know, publicly people make the right pronouncements. They don't always follow it up with sort of actions and so on. The other side of it is, you know, there's the threat to income, which is pretty obvious, and I think most of them are beginning to realize that. If tenants lose benefits, you get into default, you have huge holes in the budget going forward. You know, it's a huge risk for social landlords, really. When we sort of work with social landlords, one of the things is, when you're looking at solutions, they don't have the technical expertise in-house often. They have an IT team, but providing IT to an office setup is completely different to working out how you can do sort of mass schemes to tenants with broadband. It's a very different field, really. So they often lack that sort of knowledge, and even where the ones really want to go forward and put a scheme into place, they're often stumbling around to find out exactly, you know, what do I do, what will work, what won't. And they get cherry-picked, and they get picked off quite easily by suppliers sometimes, who come around and offer wonderful sounding packages, and then they find out later that perhaps they could have done it a heck of a lot cheaper. Yeah, yeah. Yeah. Yeah, yeah, yeah. And we come on to maybe some of the suppliers later and look at some of the things that are around. But, I mean, that would probably be fairly ideal in many ways, but it doesn't necessarily make money for people, you know. You know, as I say, you know, choosing suppliers, it really is a case, you know, we've looked around the UK, and it is a sort of lambs to the slaughter case. People go in, they don't fully understand what they're signing up for. And what I've been amazed at is when we've worked with a lot of the RSLs, if we go around and say, you need a small amount of money, you can set up a specialist team, how about just chipping in a few bob for that? The response is sort of fairly sort of, you know, muted. Somebody comes along, and we've been to a number of these sessions now where a big, you know, suppliers come along with a wonderful scheme, costs £3 or £4 million, and the room's packed with people, just showing interest. It's a real sort of little puzzle that I can't quite work out why it becomes attractive if you charge huge amounts of money. But if you're looking for small amounts, it's almost if it can't be right, this solution's not going to work. I don't know what it is, but you know, that's the thing. The other thing that happens a lot when suppliers contact RSLs and work with them is they're quite happy to shift the risk. You know, a lot of social housing tenants maybe have issues with money. If they default on payments, who picks it up? So it's amazing how many RSLs have gone into arrangements where they actually take the risk off the supplier. So if tenants go into default, the RSL ends up partly with the bill. So, you know, it's quite interesting. The ones that we work with as well, there's the whole issue about subsidy. Do you actually give it free? You know, how many people get it free? Who are they that get it free? Or do you charge? Do you subsidize it? Or do you sort of, you know, ask tenants to cover the full cost? And that's the sort of an issue that, again, different RSLs are wrestling with and really haven't come up with the answers to, I think. But the simplest thing is you just do a nice little scheme, perhaps to a limited number of tenants. You don't open it up too much, you don't charge them, it doesn't cost so much then, but often you've got sort of 6 or 7 flats in, say, a sheltered complex sharing a bit of broadband, but that's not quite the same as having it in your own house, really. So they get out of it that way. And there are huge, you know, once you look at tenants going online, the other big thing that's going to come into that for RSLs is as soon as something goes wrong, either with the computer or the line's not working, they're going to ring up and they want support. So it's the whole issue about who supports and also who provides training for tenants, so you minimize those levels. So all those sort of issues are really sort of kicking around and very largely still unresolved, I think. Yeah? Okay. So we went a little bit further, but not too much. Yeah. But that's just some of the sort of things. There are a lot of other things out there as well that you can go into, but we look later at some examples of how people have tried to address some of these things, and they've all got pros and cons that we'll have a look at. Maybe look at the table over here then. Tim, you're going to feed back here. This
Yep.
is looking at things from the broadband supplier's perspective,
So,
we hope,
short straw.
and some of the other external pressures on it.
I'm even my own flip chart paper holder. From a ruthless broadband provider, supplier point of view, supply and demand. Currently, there's no demand for lesser tariffs, so we're not going to supply them, essentially. Anybody who's online at the moment is paying the tariffs that we're charging, so that's fine until the effect of universal credit comes in and people need to be online. We're not going to have a look at how we're going to supply that. From a ruthless point of view, that's probably what they're looking at. Payments as well. So pay as you go and pay monthly. If most of the people that we're probably talking about have had bad histories with contracts or bad history with money, so chances are they won't get onto a monthly payment scheme. So they're going to go on pay as you go. Pay as you go is going to be irregular payments. They're going to be all over the place. They're going to be small amounts of money. They're going to be more of a challenge for us as an organisation to deal with. So we're going to charge more to deal with those extra things. So it's going to be more expensive for the people who need to have broadband to go online. I'm being ruthless. It feels really weird
It's
to say
amazing,
these
you weren't
things.
earlier, it sort of took...
It was all
about
going
1
on in the
minute to
mind,
come
see.
to
I
that,
was
yeah,
doing
I know.
positive things around the table, and then, yeah. So broadband co-ops. So these were kind of looking at the less ruthless points of view. I was saying with Gwalia, we've got some housing stock that's kind of spread around, so there's not necessarily concentrating in one area. Looking at ways of encouraging communities to come up with broadband co-ops might be an alternative to provision from a major broadband provider. They, as a community, they buy in bulk internet rates, and then they're able to provide that to community at a lower cost price. Corporate responsibility. There have been things over the last few years. I know 3 have done mobile dongles under corporate responsibility for certain community projects and things. But could that be a way that we as a broadband provider look at being able to provide a social tariff without impinging on our other customers who are paying the higher rate, who will probably want the lower rate if we end up providing it? So looking at corporate responsibility, having certain requirements in place for people to have the lower tariffs might be better. And those lower tariffs probably being stunted in some way, or I don't know, like lesser speeds or a lesser amount of megabytes or something like that. And pure profit, because the product is already there, it's just access. Can't quite remember. Yeah, essentially. Yeah. So the product is there. It's about making it sexy for that group, essentially. That part of the society that's not going to get accessed. It's about how do we, because we covered it, didn't we? Because we were saying that a lot of people have mobile phone contracts that are like £40 a month, and they're paying that, yet they won't pay the £2.50 for broadband to come into their house when they've already got a landline. So it's kind of making broadband sexy. I love that. For people in social housing, essentially. So, yeah.
Yeah, okay, thanks. We did put some thoughts down as well, as you guessed. I mean, one of the big things, if you think of the number of people actually think of social housing and other situations, potentially it's a big untapped market for a supplier. The question is, can you actually get the same terms out of them as you would perhaps to the mainstream audience? But if you give us a new product to, say, social housing tenants, and it's a reduced rate, all the other customers start thinking, why can't I get a reduced rate as well? So, yeah.
Excuse me, where's the evidence for the untapped market? Do we know how many housing, social housing tenants?
It's about 35%, is it 35%-ish at the moment, probably? Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
But if you look broad, a lot of older people in their own homes, it's the same sort of type of situation. They might be in private homes and so on. But it's still a significant number. It's sort of, and I suppose the market gets to a saturation point where, only so many broadband lines you can put into houses. People who want to afford them take them on, but you then get this group that perhaps haven't taken up the broadband issues and decided to sort of bite the bullet. So there is quite a large market still there potentially in the UK. It's still pretty close to, not far off the 20%, is it, Andrew?
20%.
Overall.
Well, I mean, successive surveys show that social housing is lagging
Yeah.
the average in terms of
To what degree?
well, you're still looking at a third of households that have more access, and social housing is considerably less than 40%. In digital inclusion, we look at use, so we can capture, use elsewhere rather than just home access. And you're looking at 21% still not regularly online, and social housing is around a third of the use. So, it's quite a difference.
So when you think, I mean, when you've got all your nice snazzy products and people have bought them, there's still about 20% of the population probably that aren't on broadband, so there's potentially an untapped market there. If you could get up to 98%, you'd be doing quite well then.
7% of the world.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
It's a fine balance though, isn't it? Because I liken it to the surfer analogy, the one where you're paddling your board before the wave hits. So you've got social housing tenants, and you've got RSLs, and you've got broadband providers, all trying to communicate before the wave of universal credit and the need to be online hits.
That's right.
And you're trying to encourage everybody to kind of get going rather than for it to hit and then it all fall apart.
Yeah. So there's an untapped market there. The other thing is sort of current delivery models are very profitable. Sorry. Yeah, sorry. We'll try and move the mics around if we can. Yeah, sorry. The kind of delivery models, just for sort of both broadband suppliers, they're still quite profitable. It's usually a landline and then broadband on top. You make huge profits on landlines. Once they're in, it's a guaranteed income until probably the house falls down or something. So, a lot of people are very reluctant to move away from those models. Certainly some of the bigger suppliers, and you find that without naming them, but there aren't many alternative products to that standard landline and broadband. And any new models could clearly undermine the current sort of commercial market, I suppose, which is why they're quite reluctant to move into that. With sort of social housing, one of the things at the back of the mind is the sort of creditworthiness of many of the tenants. So one of the things I think for broadband suppliers is once you put things in, are you going to get the payments? Are those sort of things, is it a safe bet? Which is why we often see them trying to shift that risk to social landlords. Get 1,000 tenants on block and, we work with you, but you're almost guaranteed 1,000 tenants' incomes, even if 500 of those sort of drop out at some point. If you're looking at alternative sort of ways of working other than the landline, then they're clearly upfront investments. If you're looking at wireless systems, those sort of things. So who pays for that? If you wanted to go to those sort of alternatives, would somebody invest in that? And I think the other thing in there is sort of when you're looking at sort of suppliers and you're looking then with RSLs, it's trying to shift some of the balances there between some of the risks and the investment, maybe subsidies, whatever, things like that perhaps would help to sort of mitigate risk and perhaps encourage suppliers to come in. But that brings in all sorts of other horrible things like state aid and distortion of markets, which, as we sort of looked around, we found sort of created all sorts of other headaches, which we didn't really want to go into. So that's just some of the things from a supplier's point of view.
Sorry, could I? Cheers.
Horton Housing Trust in England done a deal with O2. They're working with about 300 plus tenants who aren't online. O2 have said if you can sign them up to broadband, we'll pay for £5 data SIM per month for all those tenants. We'll also subsidise a tablet, £45 a month if you put in the rest. So Horton Housing Trust put in about £25, £30. Buying a tenant a £70 tablet for free, and they're getting online as well. So they're looking to expand that, but we chatted to O2, and the O2 coverage for a lot of our areas isn't that great, so it's much better with like the 3 networks. So you've got to look at your networks and see where
It's not always
the provision's good for your tenants online. So, it works for them in England. So
and there are
an interesting partnership between O2 and a housing association. So
Yeah, you see little examples of that around. You know, we'll come on to some in a moment. We've got a couple of examples there, but there are quite a few dotted around the UK. Some sort of seem a little bit more attractive than others. But there are also usually downsides to them as well, aren't there? Yeah. As we found out when we really looked at some of them. They weren't quite what they appeared on paper. But have a look anyway. The other things we just threw in there, going ahead, of course, the external factors, you've got welfare reform, public sector delivery increasingly because of cuts is online, all those sort of things. Pressures to cut costs left, right and centre. You've got ageing population, there are lots of things potentially with older people in their own homes. A lot of digital stuff could really assist in sort of looking after them. But those are huge headaches going forward, I think, for governments. And of course, most goods and services are online, so all those things are there. But if you're not online as a tenant, then you really are at sort of disadvantage. Yeah? Okay, just to talk a little bit about some of the things that we did sort of start to look at, working very closely with Community Housing Cymru. They set up a task and finish group. They drew in all their, you know, they did surveys of all their members, put together a task and finish group, which goes back about 18 months now, isn't it? Out of that, then, a little task and finish group of interested sort of members of staff got together. They've worked really on some of the, you know, the issues, looked at some potential solutions, provided a sort of report to Welsh Government back in December 2013, which is a long time ago now, isn't it? Looking at sort of different ways forward. There were revisions to that. We then started looking at potential business cases and real solutions. And currently, we're in the process of working with Welsh Government, with the National Procurement Service, to look and see if there are different sort of alternative ways in which not only different technical solutions can be put into sort of into social housing stock, but also looking within that at sort of the costings and how you could actually afford it and who's going to invest in that. So all those sort of discussions going along. And there are probably about 3 or 4 different competing models at the moment, aren't there, to be fair to say? I mean, the one is housing associations could invest and pick up a lot of the costs themselves. Other funders would prefer that probably. On the other hand, some might look to Welsh Government to cover those costs. And I'm sure Welsh Government in the current climate not necessarily so happy with that. You could look at grants and funding to sort of maybe fund and try and get these out. But there aren't many funders out there who go for the digital inclusion agenda when you start looking at it, particularly if you want larger amounts of money. And the other one that we've tended to look at is whether it's possible to set up some sort of procurement framework. An individual housing association come on and they can buy what they want off that framework. But that's a long sort of set of discussions that's going to be ongoing for a little while, I think, at the moment. So there are different alternatives being looked at, but there isn't any sort of clear way forward at the moment. I think it's probably fair to say. Everybody's got different views on what it probably would be in an ideal world.
Okay, so
this is Hayley's bit. We're going to look at some sort of solutions then, I hope.
I think we've already covered a couple of different types of solutions, both working with internet service providers. Obviously, Halton are working with O2. And there was a mention here around community Wi-Fi schemes and the potential of setting them up in communities as well. So I'm going to talk through just a couple of examples to just demonstrate the opportunities that are out there. You know, there are a lot of different schemes out there. Not loads, really. There's probably only about kind of 10 to 15 that we've come up with, but they're still emerging, really. And I've just kind of picked out a couple of them. Next one, yeah. Thanks, Terry. A couple of them just to demonstrate the types of models that are available. Glasgow Housing Association back in 2013, they worked with BT to put Wi-Fi into a block of flats in Knightswood in Glasgow. So they covered 138 flats within that block. They had quite a substantial amount of funding from Scottish Government, £70,000 and able to put in that infrastructure. So you're getting an idea of how costly these kinds of schemes are. Glasgow Housing Association gave a tablet to all the tenants to help them get online. And once the infrastructure is all set up, Glasgow Housing Association are responsible for the ongoing maintenance of it, and they estimate that it's costing them around £5 per tenant a month to do that going forward, which they're taking the hit for. They see in their business case that, you know, the benefits of getting their tenants online are worthwhile really for them to take the hit and pay that going forward. They did a little bit of analysis at the start of the project to look at the outcomes for the tenants and the benefits of them from getting online. 2/3 of the tenants were actively seeking employment opportunities online once they were brought into the scheme. And they claim that over 60% of the residents saved more than £100 in the first few months of it going live. I've got a video now on YouTube just summarising the partnership between BT and Glasgow for you to take a look at.
What's worth saying in that one is they didn't really look at that very different sort of ways that you could look at community Wi-Fi schemes within some of the estate, where they've stayed away from that, they've sheared away. They still stick very much to sort of a line goes into a building, even if it's split and shared amongst houses. They haven't really gone and looked at sort of broader sort of alternatives really that they could.
Yeah.
We're here today in Knightswood. It's the pilot of what I think is a really exciting programme. It's called Click and Connect. It's a collective collaboration between Glasgow Housing Association and BT. And the Scottish Government is supporting it. We've helped fund some of the infrastructure, but it's to get a whole block of GHA flats all connected using Wi-Fi to allow every participant, every tenant to have access.
It's really important. In fact, it's essential now that you get online, that you get yourselves another skill, that socially you're connected, that you're connected in filling out forms, in online banking, but most importantly, it gives you another skill and it makes you feel that you are really developing yourself. So, delighted that it's here, delighted we're first in Knightswood, delighted it's going to be rolled out, and I say to all Knightswoodians and people in Garscadden, be like me, if you come late to it, you'll enjoy it even more.
Well, this morning, with the launch today of this pilot with Glasgow Housing Association of very affordable high-speed broadband to their tenants, is a significant landmark and what I think is going to be the best project in social housing in Britain. BT is clearly investing significant sums of money in deploying high-speed broadband across the UK, including here in Glasgow, but without people using it, it doesn't achieve the aims, and we all know that, particularly for the elderly and others who aren't online, it can help transform their lives, help get jobs, help interact with family and help learn. So this project today is a beginning, but GHA being about the biggest social landlord in Britain, I look forward to 2 or 3 years from now working with them to see the whole of the client base online and gaining the benefits of our services.
The concept behind it is excellent. It's obviously going to benefit a lot of the tenants, myself primarily, for looking for work, etc. And it's also going to benefit my kids for watching CITV and CBBC. But the practical side of it is that it enables me to utilise the broadband in-house rather than having to look at other streams such as the library, for example, which is kind of restrictive in this area because the local library has been closed for the last 13 weeks. So having the facility in the flat will enable me to actually carry out a lot more job searches.
I really want to do online shopping so that I can order and have it delivered. That's my main reason for doing the course. And anything else that follows, I'd be quite happy to try and learn.
Even if we connected the homes, people still don't know how to use it. So we've offered some training and we're using this community flat so that people can come along twice a week and there's the opportunity for some structured training or even just drop in. So if you're just not sure about how to maybe make an email, send an email, find a website, then the trainer's here to help them to do that.
That helps people get access to the digital world, and that's really important. And in Glasgow that's more important than anywhere else, when we know there's a big challenge to get more people using the internet.
Okay, so you can see in that example from the tenant stories there, you know, the value of them actually having access with the home, within the home itself. Obviously, at the moment, you know, the other option is for them to go to libraries and other community access points. But we're seeing closure of libraries at the moment, and we feel that really access in the home is true digital access. That example really showed, obviously a block of flats, which is seen as kind of...
When the monolithic Haygate housing estate...
Oh, sorry. That's the next one, isn't it?
We're running into the next video now.
Looks like it stopped. Anyway, sorry. Yeah, that's a block of flats, which is seen as kind of technically an easier solution, whereas if you've got a street of houses, that's where the real difficulties come in. The examples of pilots where people have done that are very few and far between, but we have got an example here in Wales of Merthyr Valley Homes. They wanted to get their Gelli estate online. Less than a third of tenants on that estate were connected to the internet, and 80% of them would be affected by welfare reform, which would mean that they'd have to get online, apply for their universal credit online. So there was a real kind of business case to do something in that area. They received grant funding from Nominate Trust, £50,000, to prototype the design of a new community hybrid network Wi-Fi scheme. And they decided to mirror the type of infrastructure that's actually used in Spain by Griffy.net, which is, I'm not very technical minded, but it's basically a series of nodes that bounce around the Wi-Fi signal.
It's a series of wireless nodes. It's a community-wide Wi-Fi system. They beam the signal in from their offices in the middle of Merthyr. They send a wireless signal straight up to the estate, which is on the hill above, and then they distribute it around the estate with a series of small masts.
Yeah. They wanted it to be a true kind of bottom-up and community-led project, so they undertook quite a bit of community engagement work at the start. They got 40 homes buying into the pilot of the project, and they also recruited digital champions. Ian and Tom there are the digital champions in the area who volunteer to set up and maintain the actual network. They're on hand, they've got their phone, the neighbours can ring them any time of the day if their internet's not working, and they volunteered their time to actually do that, and obviously gain some great digital skills and experience from doing that. It was a pilot to start with. They had great feedback from it. They've deemed it as a success. 100% of those were 40 of the homes that were involved or recommended it, and going forward Merthyr Valley Homes are looking to expand that to a further 62 homes across the Gelli estate. They're also looking at expanding the network further into another part of Merthyr, and they're also possibly exploring working with other housing associations in the area to expand that network even further.
I think the interesting thing with that, though, is I don't think they've yet come up with a charging system.
No, I was going to
it's
say,
free,
no.
and there are large grants gone in.
Yeah,
so the Housing Association or a grant body has invested hugely in that.
And at the moment, they are offering it for free for tenants. They're still working on the business case of whether they continue to charge or do start charging in future. But it's a very costly infrastructure. I haven't got the figures on what Merthyr Valley Homes put in, but they had 40,000 for Nominate.
I'll go across with this.
I don't off the top of my head, no. But the contact there would be Nicholas Giles, who works in Merthyr Valley Homes, if you've got any questions. And they've actually produced an evaluation report a couple of months ago on Digital Merthyr, which is the name of the project. So if you want to have a copy of that, I'm happy to circulate it around. So, next. Another project that we came across when we were looking at different examples, we were interested in seeing if there's any options for pay-as-you-go types of models, and Sevenside Housing Association worked with Social Telecoms in Shrewsbury to develop a digital den, which they tried to kind of overcome the skills, the motivation, and the affordable broadband barriers all in one place. So you can go to there, you can go and use the computers there as in an internet cafe, you can go there for your training, your skills, and they've also set up a Wi-Fi scheme that covers the area surrounding that digital den where the tenants can go pay £2 a week, isn't it?
Yeah,
I'm sure it's £2
fairly
a
small
week.
amounts.
So they obviously get the code then, pay-as-you-go model, which is something that we think is a worthwhile kind of model really for social housing tenancy who are used to that kind of payment structure.
That was an unusual one because it took place very close to a good source of broadband. they couldn't provide any sort of models where perhaps they provided a similar service to, say, an estate that was 5 miles from the, you know, a really good broadband source. So it was very area specific.
Yeah.
But it was a nice little example. But I think there were also issues about capacity, weren't there?
Exactly. It's not
There
one
were
you can
obviously 2 or 3
expand
quite
easily.
driven people in the project who made it work.
Yeah.
And you thought if you scaled that up and went outside, they'd have to take new people on, and would they actually cope in quite the same way if they had to do that sort of rapid expansion?
The black screen there, sorry, is I was going to show you a YouTube clip of the digital den, but it doesn't go into too much detail actually about the Wi-Fi, so I'll skip over that because we're running quite short on time at the moment. And if you're interested, you can go on YouTube and type in the digital den, you can find out some about it there. Finally, the sheltered accommodation models. Quite a lot of housing associations are looking into this now. CommunityUK.net, they're working with Orbit Housing, sheltered accommodation. They're getting 20 of their sheltered schemes up and running with Wi-Fi, and Orbit have been happy to take the hit in the cost of that, put the infrastructure in and not charge those that are using the Wi-Fi within it. CommunityUK.net also offer it to develop solutions for general needs housing, and by that I mean kind of streets of housing as well. And a couple of housing associations in South Wales met with them
We
a while back.
met at Melin. There were about 7 or 8 housing associations came along, and
Yeah.
they'd actually mapped a large number of the sort of South Wales valleys, and they actually sort of came across and said we could actually provide broadband to all your tenants, put all the infrastructure in that area. It'll cost you about £2 or £3 million. And they had a full audience there to listen to them, which was quite surprising to us. But actually, when we asked them the questions, they were actually quoting a figure that was actually only about 1/3 of the total cost. There were about 2/3 of the costs were hidden or masked. So they weren't being that sort of honest, really, with the sort of housing associations when they approached them. But I still found it quite amazing that you mention huge amounts of money and people come and listen. It's,
Back on to kind of the sheltered accommodation, Wales and West are putting in Wi-Fi, Meraki wireless access points in all 100 of their sheltered schemes across Wales. And they've been doing that for quite some time now. They've been working with Communities 2.0 and BT on that to train their tenants. They've got an intergenerational project up and running as well, where they're working with the local schools to get them to volunteer their time and work with the residents there to help train them up as well.
And they've actually, I think, talked to the people, the BT person in Glasgow, if I understand it, to look at that scheme and possibly thinking about doing some replication here as well, isn't it?
Of the streets of housing, do you mean?
Of the BT scheme up in Glasgow Housing.
Right, the
I
flats.
think they've been in touch with BT as well, as I understand it, yeah.
So you've seen examples there of housing associations either working with major suppliers or developing their own infrastructure, which is obviously very costly. We found that, you know, there's a number of smaller internet service providers working in Wales. These are just a couple here who are obviously a bit more flexible, I suppose, in their working in terms of developing different types of infrastructure, which is fine at small scale. If you're looking really at economies of scale to get the price really, it's when there's issues around capacity, I suppose, as well.
I think when we did some work within Cardiff in their Super Connected Cities process, they've actually got a list of about 40 of these suppliers, so there are quite a few actually around. But knowing which ones to choose and which offer you a good solution and a cost-effective solution is a different issue completely.
Yeah. So these projects have really picked up where the market is failing, piloted really by the willing, those that are prepared to put quite a bit of money behind it, and also you know, they've gone ahead and done it without really going out there and seeing and I suppose approaching several different to get the best deal. They've usually just gone to sometimes the first
either
one.
somebody has approached a housing association or somebody in a housing association comes across a scheme somewhere and thinks that would be really good to have without realising sometimes there are often quite a few alternatives out there.
Yeah. So there was obviously opportunity there for collective purchasing power for housing associations to come together. Terry picked up on earlier is, you know, developing these schemes, you really need a sound kind of telecoms and technical experience in order to identify, you know, what kind of network is needed, who to approach, what kind of price would be good. You know, these are all issues and very difficult to understand. It's not something that housing association IT department would really be able to pick up really on top of their work. And we found that actually, you know, that technical expertise is really missing, I suppose, for the sector to go to in terms of getting impartial advice on where to go to. There's also issues around, you know, does the housing association charge or do they take the hit? I think, well, actually all of those examples there show that they've actually taken the hit. They see that, you know, the benefits of getting them online are worthwhile for the association. Obviously, smaller associations won't be able to afford to get that payment to pay that up front and continue paying for them. Terry, I think this is you now.
So what we sort of started to sort of work towards is sort of, when we sort of went through all these sort of issues, looked at all the examples, we effectively came up with a list of some of the things that clearly didn't seem to be in place that perhaps would have helped to take the sort of the whole programme forward. As Hayley's mentioned, housing associations often they've got their own IT departments, but the sort of things that we're talking about are usually well outside their knowledge base and expertise. You really need people, and there aren't huge numbers of them around. It's very specialist telecoms thing. Somebody can visit a site and tell you, oh, that would work, but that wouldn't. To wander around an estate and sort of work out, could you Wi-Fi it, or a block of flats, and see what would be the best way in which you could get signals into the, you know, into blocks of flats. That sort of thing. It is a sort of an unusual area of expertise, and you know, it's completely lacking at the moment. What you do get is a company will come to you, say this would work, but there's nobody there to actually really sort of go to independently and say, well, yeah, it would. You know, that's a good deal, as opposed to picking off a bad deal. Again, sort of actually sort of for housing associations, usually they have to go and find out who it is they want to deal with. And all those examples have usually come about more by chance, I think, than anything else, or by luck. But there isn't a sort of list, if you like, of proven suppliers out there you can go and talk to, weigh up the pros and cons of the sort of different models and solutions they're offering. There are ongoing issues as well about sort of payments, and as soon as housing associations subsidise tenants, if they give it free, all right, nobody's going to really quibble probably if it's a block of sheltered housing or something. You do this on an estate scale, and you put monies in to make sure there's a scheme up and working, and somebody in one of the big telecoms companies is going to come along and cry foul and say, you know, you've distorted the market, there are state aid issues. So all those sort of things, potentially, when you look at doing things with a system that's, you know, you're subsidising to some extent, unless you're charging the full market rate, really. One of the things we came across as well was the sort of the legal links between some of the housing association projects and the suppliers. And there were various sort of packages there, but one of the key elements in lots of them was the element of risk, you know, the default stuff that we mentioned earlier. And it was amazing the different approaches being taken by the different projects. Sometimes the sort of broadband supplier would actually accept the risk, but in a lot of cases, they were actually moving that risk onto the housing associations by looking at block numbers, signing up, and that sort of thing. So I think the broadband suppliers have been quite canny in the way they sort of operated. The other thing that also came out from, you know, talking to a lot of the sort of projects and elsewhere is the whole issue of support. And whatever you were doing, if you're setting a scheme up locally, once something goes wrong, the first person they ring is the person they know, and that's going to be somebody in the housing association. It's probably not going to be a broadband supplier in Portsmouth or somewhere. So you're going to have big issues about what happens when things go wrong, really. And often in some of the deals, I think when we looked at the one where they'd approached a number of the housing association in the valleys, the supplier was in Portsmouth, and they were basically saying, look, this is a really robust situation. Once we set all these masts up and it's working, it's not likely to go wrong. We can actually step back and leave you to it, you know? And of course, as soon as something goes wrong, the housing association is either going to have to go back and pay huge amounts of money to get something corrected, or they're going to have find somebody else who can step in and actually help them. So there are big issues around support as well to sort of deal with. So we moved on, just some of the sort of decisions probably sort of outstanding going forward. A lot of people would say just leave it to the market, and that eventually the market will catch up and take over. Hasn't worked so far. And I think unless housing tenants sometimes get a big boost in money from the government, so the benefits rate shoots through the roof, it's probably not going to happen. It's not an attractive proposition. Another thing for housing associations is, do you work by yourself? Or do you actually bind together with a number of housing associations, or maybe all of them together, and then sort of look at working together? We identified when we were looking around, there are certain areas of expertise, technical, legal, whole range of things really, that are missing. And is that something you could buy in from somewhere? Are there experts out there you can buy on tap? There aren't really. So do the housing associations maybe come together and employ somebody? You know, big question marks there. We came up with a sort of potential sort of project idea that could go forward, which was called Digital Solution Wales, which Community Housing Cymru would have managed. And that effectively would have been a small team of 2 or 3 people who could provide all these missing ingredients and advise housing associations on all the different aspects, whether it's technical, legal, whatever. So you've got that on the one hand, but somebody would need to fund that approach. And there is always a reluctance to sort of come up with little amounts of money. Very small amounts of money, though, compared to sort of the scheme we talked about in the valleys, where somebody was looking for, say, 2 or 3 million. But you know, relatively small. Or do you actually look more to sort of procurement frameworks and just give people, give housing associations a framework so they can identify off that a number of sort of suppliers who can supply either legal advice, technical advice, different solutions, and so on. So that's sort of still a discussion ongoing. If you sort of are really going to move this, if you look at these sort of issues like the Gwefi project, or you look at Glasgow, they got off the ground. They've got limitations, but they got off the ground because somebody pumped money in. You know, I think it's 70,000 quid in one. I think the Gwefi thing was probably closer to, it's well over 100,000 from memory. It was a big amount of money they got from Nominet and elsewhere, if I remember. Yeah. So do you have that sort of money to prime it and get it set up? The question there is sort of who pays for all of that, and we've looked at different alternatives, and everybody passes the solution back and forth. So whether it's RSLs, whether it's perhaps looking to government, as in Scotland, or it's the market that comes up with that. And there's that huge question which people shy away from, is whether tenants should pay for it. And if so, do they pay the full cost? We've not really come across any of the projects yet that, other than sort of offering sort of small amounts of broadband width for maybe a fee of £5 or something like that, which is great for just doing your emails and things, but if you want to sort of anything else, then we didn't come across a lot really where tenants are paying the full whack for the broadband. There weren't that many. So those things are all still unresolved and big issues for sort of housing associations. As I said, the Digital Solutions Wales thing, which Hayley worked on, would have been a little team with a project leader, technical officer, and somebody actually doing all the procurement and contract side. That was one possible solution that would have perhaps sort of could have been shared between all the housing associations together. They all put in, say, £5,000 or £6,000, could have paid for that comfortably. So it's not huge amounts of money at the end of the day, but that would have actually given you all these sort of the confidence really in any solutions being then procured with, say, a broadband supplier. They could advise you on which suppliers offered the best solution, advise you on whether it's cost effective. All those sort of things could have been done really. So that was one of the alternatives that we actually looked for, and that's still around in the ether, but we may have to look elsewhere for some of those solutions. And that's probably about it, isn't it? So give you a sort of flavour of the sort of work that's been going on, but also where we're at the moment. So there are lots and lots of still unanswered questions going forward. And whoever sort of is presumably working on a new Welsh Government project will still have these issues to sort of, to resolve, and it's still there for housing associations. So that's it. So quite happy to take questions if you want, if we can answer them.
Just a point. Can everyone hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you, Andrew.
I was fortunate enough to visit the Glasgow block of flats actually, and it's interesting. The closing point was about restrictions on bandwidth, and it was interesting from speaking to people at that project that the majority of tenants actually didn't take up that restricted option. They stuck with the market option because they wanted you know, the
Yeah,
full
yeah,
choice.
yeah.
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 I think that's going to be a key issue
Yeah.
when we're introducing
Yeah.
social tariffs, is making sure
Yeah.
that people can still do everything they need to do to benefit their lives.
Yeah.
So there's going to be that delicate balance striking really between, you know, how much we charge and what people can do.
Yeah, we found a number of those sort of schemes out there that had different types of tariff. So there'd be the, you know, what seemed the attractive, affordable bit, but you only got 2 meg of broadband. When you wanted more, so you could download films and whatever, you went back up closer to commercial levels. But I think the interesting thing there is just seeing how smart, there's nobody from BT here, is there? But how smart BT were in a sense, because by, you know, allying with Glasgow to come up with an affordable solution, I suppose the Housing Association did a lot of their marketing for them. And in the end, people would have gone on for the more commercial tariffs and signed up. So it was quite smart in some ways, I would imagine. It's a good loss leader. It's like going to the supermarket for your bread or your milk, isn't it? You know, give a little affordable broadband scheme here, and then everybody, oh, well, that's all right, but I'd like something more. So some of the commercial providers, you can come in and do that quite neatly. Yeah. Well, suppliers now.
Yeah, you're going to hear the other side of the nasty broadband bit, I guess, now.
I know.
We have got a solution. It's not the silver bullet. We think it's as close to what we can probably get that's commercial and sustainable. And we're doing that in conjunction with TalkTalk. It's an exclusive arrangement with them. So I'm going to do a bit of promotion here. Why not? It's £11.85 a month.
Yeah.
It's unlimited. There's no restrictions. There's no sign-up fees. There's no penalties. There's no nothing at all. And that's for 12 months. It is an 18-month contract. It does kick up after the 12 months to £20.20, but you can cancel at 12 months with no penalties attached to that as well. That has been born out of the Connected Housing Initiative, and they went away to try and challenge what that price point would be, what was affordable. £10 wasn't, you know, was the first number, but 12 then came back, which is why we've managed to get the 11.85. So I'm hoping that kind of covers off the nasty bit on the broadband guys. They are doing their bit. You're right that they'd love to be able to put this out. They'd like to be able to do a social tariff, but that does upset their core business, and that's what they're really conscious of. So by putting us in the middle and us committing to them to do X amount of connections, that allows us to then get to this price point. So they are listening. There are 2 or 3 others that are in the wings as well that are kind of watching what we're doing, and I'm sure they'll come and join the party later on as well. So they are doing something.
Yeah. Okay. Do you want to use the mic? No. You're not that loud. You're not that loud. You've got a headache. Come on. Use the mic, Karen. Nobody can hear you. Go on.
Right, okay.
Come on.
I was just querying whether or not there's a sort of obligation to have a decent credit rating and a bank account and all those sorts of things before you can sign up to that. Because you might be able to afford £12 a month, but if you haven't got the means to pay TalkTalk or you or whoever, then it doesn't solve it for lots of social housing tenants.
Their credit check there is a credit check that's involved, and it is low. It's currently about their average run rate runs, and I probably shouldn't be saying this. There's about 15 to 20% failure anyway. We don't expect that to be any different for the demographic that we're talking to. The good thing that we've got then is because we're aligning ourselves with the housing associations as well. If somebody does fail, we know about it. Right? So at that point then we can go back to the housing association, talk then with regards to credit unions, look at financial inclusion and stuff as well. So it's not just, here's broadband, thank you very much. It's let's get involved then with the financial inclusion side of it as well. So, and if at that point that fails and we can't do anything with regards to broadband, we have got a pay-as-you-go solution, which is affordable data as well. So we can get people into being connected without having a contract in place. And that's conventional pay-as-you-go. There's nothing special about that at all. All right, that's okay.
That's okay. I think just to sort of say, David, that when we had the sort of discussions with all the different workers from digital inclusion workers from the Housing Association, we were still looking for that magic figure of maybe a £5 a month. and looking at ways of doing that, which would still take out, say, costs like landlines and other sorts of things. So, I mean, that was the sort of magic bullet, wasn't it, that people were looking at?
Yeah, BT do a scheme for landline and broadband separately, which is, I think it's $4.95 for both, but you have to be on certain benefits and all the other kind of thing, and if you drop out of benefits you've got to let them know, and there's all sorts of things. It's not a relatively straightforward process. This, you just have to let us know that you're a housing association, social tenant or council tenant, and that's it, nothing else.
Okay, good sell. Yeah, I know. Okay. Any other questions before it's time for sort of coffee? Magic word? But we're around anyway. If you want to come and sort of chat to us and go into more detail about some of the things, more than happy to ask questions, to answer questions during the day, really.
Yeah.
If you want. Okay. I think you're a coffee break now, is that right?
Yeah, coffee.
Yeah. Everything's running late.